G650 touched down on the tarmac at Farnborough Airport at 4:12 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, cutting through the thick, damp fog of the Hampshire dawn. There was no royal pavilion waiting. There was no honour guard. There was no press pool camped out at the perimeter fence because the flight manifest had been scrubbed, the tail number had been masked through a shell corporation, and the landing slot had been booked under a generic corporate logistics code. When the cabin door opened, only one person walked down the airstairs. Prince Harry. He carried a single leather weekender bag. He wore a dark, unbranded jacket. He looked exhausted, hollowed out, and entirely alone. There were no aides, there were no nannies, and, most conspicuously, there was no Meghan. As his boots hit the British tarmac for the first time in over 8 months, a black Range Rover pulled up. The driver, a retired protection officer Harry had personally hired outside the royal security apparatus, opened the door. Harry got in. The car pulled away. And at that exact moment, 40 miles away in London, inside the secure operations room at the Home Office, a senior civil servant pressed a button on a digital console, transmitting a finalised encrypted legal instrument to the UK Border Force, the Privy Council, and the Private Secretary to the Prince of Wales. The instrument was titled the Sovereign Security and Diplomatic Integrity Exclusion Order, and its operative clause was singular, absolute, and devastating. The individual identified herein, Meghan, Duchess of Sussex, is hereby classified as a Tier 2 diplomatic and commercial risk and is permanently barred from entering the United Kingdom, its territories, or its sovereign estates, effective immediately and without right of standard appeal. Harry had left his wife in California, and Prince William had just legally locked her out of his country. Forever. Before we reconstruct the brutal, irreconcilable fracture in Montecito that drove Harry onto that plane alone, before we reveal the specific commercial contract that served as the final breaking point, and before we unpack the terrifying legal architecture of William's emergency decree, a decree that bypasses standard immigration law and weaponizes national security protocols to permanently exile a duchess, make sure to hit subscribe to and turn on the notification bell. Because this story is not about a marital spat, it is not about tabloid gossip. It is about the violent collision between a multi-million-dollar commercial empire and the ancient, unforgiving machinery of the British state. It is about a husband who realized he was being erased in his own home, and a future king who decided that the only way to save his brother's soul was to legally amputate his brother's wife from the geography of the crown. To understand why Harry left, and why William responded with such nuclear legal force, we must first discard the public narrative that the Sussexes' life in California is a unified, happy front. The public sees the polished Netflix documentaries, the curated Instagram posts, the carefully managed Arkwell philanthropy. But behind the gates of the Montecito estate, a profound structural rot had been setting in for over a year. The fracture was not about the royal family, it was not about Harry's grief, or Meghan's grievances, or the ongoing feud with William. The fracture was about identity, commerce, and the fundamental question of who actually owned the Sussex brand. Over the past 18 months, Archewell had transitioned from a traditional charitable foundation into a sprawling, aggressive commercial media and lifestyle conglomerate. And as the revenue streams grew, so did the influence of the American venture capitalists and Hollywood executives who were funding it. Harry, who had fled the British institution because he felt treated as a commodity, was slowly waking up to the terrifying realization that he had simply traded one institution for another. And in this new institution, he was not the principal. He was the prop. The catalyst for the departure occurred 3 weeks before the flight. Arkwell's executive board, heavily influenced by its primary American investors, proposed a new commercial vertical, Arkwell Jr. It was a comprehensive lifestyle, educational, and media brand aimed at children, leveraging the royal adjacent status of Archie and Lilibet. The pitch deck, which Harry was presented with during a board meeting in Los Angeles, proposed using the children's likenesses, their daily routines, and their unique bicultural heritage to sell premium educational subscriptions, children's apparel, and a serialized animated show. The projected revenue was staggering, $40 million in the first 2 years. But to Harry, it was a nightmare. It was the exact commodification of his children's bloodline that he had accused the British tabloids of. He vetoed the project immediately and unequivocally. He stated, in front of the board, that his children were not content, they were not IP, and they would never be used to sell products. The board's response was not to accept his veto, it was to outmaneuver him. The lead investor, a powerful Silicon Valley venture capitalist, pulled Harry aside after the meeting and explained the legal reality of their corporate structure. Because the initial seed funding and the primary intellectual property trademarks had been registered under a holding company where Meghan held the controlling equity stake, a structure designed years ago to protect her from British tax liabilities and royal PR interference, Harry did not actually have the unilateral executive authority to veto a board-approved commercial vertical if it did not directly violate the charitable charter. The investor told Harry, politely but firmly, "You are the face of the brand, Harry, but Meghan is the CEO and the majority shareholder. If she signs off on Archewell Jr., it goes forward. Your veto is advisory, not binding." Harry was stunned. He went home. He confronted Meghan, and the confrontation was not a screaming match. It was a cold, devastating realization. Meghan, driven by the fiduciary duty to her investors and her own vision for their commercial empire, believed the project was a brilliant, empowering way to secure their children's financial future and build a legacy. Harry believed it was the ultimate betrayal of their original reason for leaving the UK. He looked at his wife and realized that the woman he had burned his life down to protect was now looking at him not as a husband, but as a dissenting minority shareholder. That night, Harry packed a single bag. He did not pack to leave forever. He packed to leave for a while. He told Meghan he was going to the UK to see his father, to clear his head, and to figure out who he was when he wasn't being managed by a board of directors. Meghan, believing it was a temporary retreat, a moment of masculine frustration that would pass, did not stop him. She assumed he would be back in 2 weeks. She assumed the board would restructure the deal to appease him. She assumed the marriage, however strained, was intact. She did not know that Harry had already made a phone call. A phone call not to his father, not to his therapists, but to a senior constitutional lawyer in London, a man who specializes in the intersection of royal prerogative, national security, and high net worth international divorce. Harry didn't call him to file for divorce. He called him to ask a single hypothetical question. If my wife's commercial empire begins leveraging my children's royal bloodline for foreign venture capital, does the British state have a mechanism to stop it? The lawyer's answer was yes, and that answer triggered a chain of events that would lead to the emergency decree. When Harry's lawyer approached the Prince of Wales's legal team at Kensington Palace, William did not react with brotherly sympathy. He reacted with institutional alarm. William has spent the last 3 years quietly building a firewall between the core monarchy and the peripheral commercial activities of the Sussexes. He had tolerated the Netflix deals. He had tolerated the memoir. He had tolerated the podcasts, because those were adult enterprises. But the moment Harry's legal team briefed William on the Archewell Jr. proposal and the fact that foreign venture capital was preparing to monetize the likenesses of the direct descendants of the British sovereign, William's tolerance evaporated. This was no longer a family dispute. This was a constitutional and diplomatic vulnerability. If an American corporate board, funded by international capital, held the commercial rights to the images and narratives of the King's grandchildren, the British state had effectively lost control of its own royal imagery to foreign shareholders. William convened an emergency session in his private study. Present were Catherine, his most senior legal advisor, and a liaison from the Cabinet Office. William laid out the problem. Archewell is preparing to commercialise the King's grandchildren. The corporate structure gives Meghan controlling interest. Harry cannot stop it from the inside. If this launches, the British monarchy's imagery will be subject to the profit motives of a Silicon Valley board. We cannot allow the bloodline to be franchised. Catherine, whose strategic mind is the sharpest in the royal household, identified the solution. We cannot sue them. They are operating legally under US corporate law. We cannot ask Harry to divorce her. That is his personal choice and a PR disaster. But we can change the geography. We can make it legally impossible for the commercial entity to operate on British soil. and we can make it legally impossible for the principal of that entity to enter the country. This is where the legal architecture of the emergency decree was born. Standard immigration law does not allow the government to ban a citizen's spouse without immense, publicly litigated cause. Meghan is a US citizen. She has a right to apply for a visa. But William did not use standard immigration law. He reached back into the darkest, most archaic, and most powerful tools of the British state, the royal prerogative, intersecting with the National Security and Investment Act. William's legal team drafted a directive that classified ArcUL's specific foreign funding structures as a Tier 2 diplomatic and commercial risk. They argued in a highly classified briefing to the Home Secretary that allowing a foreign-funded corporate entity to commercially exploit the likenesses of the sovereign's direct descendants constituted a subversion of sovereign dignity and a risk to diplomatic integrity. The legal mechanism was ruthless in its precision. The decree did not ban Meghan because she was Meghan. It banned the principal director of a specific flagged commercial entity from entering the UK to conduct any business, social, or familial engagements that could be leveraged for commercial gain or brand association with the Crown. Because ArcUL's entire value proposition is its proximity to the Crown, any visit Meghan makes to the UK is legally classified under this decree as a commercial exploitation of sovereign adjacency. Therefore, her entry is barred under national security and diplomatic protection protocols. If she attempts to enter the UK, she will not be processed by a standard border agent.
She will be detained, subjected to a 90-day MI5 financial and diplomatic vetting process, and ultimately denied entry. It is a bureaucratic trapdoor. It is a legal checkmate. It is an emergency decree that effectively exiles her, not by naming her, but by naming her business.
And because it is classified under national security, she cannot challenge it in a public court without triggering a full, public audit of ArcUL's foreign funding, which would destroy the company's valuation overnight. William had built a cage out of corporate law, and he had just locked the door. Harry was briefed on the decree by William's legal team 2 days before his flight. He sat in the glass-walled office of his London lawyer, reading the 12-page document. He read the classification of his wife's company as a diplomatic risk. He read the suspension of her right to enter the country. He read the absolute unappealable finality of the order, and he understood with a sickening clarity what his brother had done. William had not just banned Meghan. William had drawn a line in the sand and told Harry, "You can come back, but she cannot. And if you want to be part of this family, you must leave the empire behind." Harry did not call Meghan to warn her. He didn't ask William to rescind it. He simply signed the acknowledgement of the decree, picked up his weekender bag, and drove to the private airfield in Van Nuys. He boarded the Gulfstream. And he flew into the fog of Hampshire, leaving his wife, his business, and his California life on the other side of the Atlantic. The confrontation between the brothers took place at Windsor Castle, not in a formal stateroom, but in the small, oak-panelled library where they used to play as children. Harry arrived at 9 a.m., looking jet-lagged and hollow. William was already there, standing by the window, watching the groundskeepers work on the lawn. There were no aides, no protection officers inside the room, just the two of them. The silence stretched for nearly 2 minutes before William turned. He did not offer a hand. He did not offer a greeting. He simply said, "You read the document." Harry nodded. "I read it. You classified her as a national security risk, Will. You classified my wife as a threat to the state." William's voice was flat, devoid of the usual brotherly warmth. "I classified a foreign-funded corporate entity that is attempting to franchise the king's grandchildren as a diplomatic risk. She is the principal of that entity. The decree is not personal, Harry. It is structural. It is the institution protecting its bloodline from being sold to a Silicon Valley board." Harry stepped forward, his voice rising, the exhaustion giving way to a deep, vibrating anger. "It is entirely personal. You used the machinery of the state to destroy my marriage. You knew I was coming back to figure things out, and you used that window to drop a legal nuclear bomb on my life. You didn't just ban her from the country, Will. You banned her from my children's heritage. You banned her from standing next to me at Dad's future funeral. You banned her from the soil where my mother is buried. You didn't protect the institution. You weaponized it." William did not flinch. He walked to the desk and picked up a single sheet of paper, the Archewell Junior pitch deck that Harry's lawyer had provided. He held it up. "This is what I protected you from. They were going to put Archie and Lilibet on a subscription app, Harry. They were going to monetize your mother's tragedy to sell educational toys. You came to me and asked if the state could stop it. I stopped it. If the cost of stopping it is that she cannot set foot in this country, then that is a cost I am willing to pay. And if you are honest with yourself, it is a cost you are willing to pay." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Harry looked at the pitch deck in his brother's hand. He looked at the royal crest carved into the oak panelling above the fireplace. He looked at William, the man who was now, in every practical sense, the king in waiting, the man who wielded the power of the state with the cold precision of a surgeon. And Harry realized the terrifying truth of William's assessment. He was angry. He was devastated. But William was right. Harry had not flown back to the UK just to escape the... He had flown back because, deep down, he knew the commercial machine in California was eating his soul, and he lacked the strength to dismantle it himself. He had needed the institution to intervene. He had needed his brother to be the monster so that he didn't have to be the executioner. Harry sank into a leather armchair. He put his head in his hands, and he wept. Not the quiet, dignified tears of a prince, the ugly, shaking, gasping sobs of a man who realizes he has lost his wife, his business, and his autonomy, all in a single morning. William walked over. He did not hug him. He simply placed a hand on Harry's shoulder and said, quietly, "You are home, Harry. The machine is stopped. Now you have to figure out how to live without it." The news of the decree reached Montecito at 6 p.m. California time. Meghan was in her home office, reviewing the final contracts for a new podcast season when her lead American attorney called. His voice was tight, panicked. He explained the Home Office directive. He explained the Tier 2 classification. He explained the 90-day MI5 vetting trap. Meghan listened in absolute silence. She did not interrupt. She did not shout. When the attorney finished, she asked one question. "Can we sue the Home Office for discrimination and spousal alienation?" The attorney sighed. "No, because the decree doesn't name you. It names the corporate entity. If we sue, we have to open Archewell's books to a British High Court to prove the entity isn't a risk. If we open the books, the foreign investors will pull out and the company will collapse. It's a perfect trap." William didn't just lock the door, Meghan. He buried the key under a mountain of national security law. You cannot enter the UK, not for a holiday, not for a visit, not for a funeral. If you step on a British Airways flight, you will be detained at the border. Meghan hung up the phone. She walked out onto the terrace overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the manicured lawns of her multi-million-dollar. She had spent the last 4 years building an empire outside the monarchy. She had built a fortress of wealth, influence, and media power. She had believed that by becoming a commercial titan, she had made herself untouchable. She had believed that the British institution was a relic, a fading power that could not touch her in California. But in one morning, Prince William had reminded her of a fundamental, inescapable truth. The British state is not a relic. It is a sovereign power with centuries of legal architecture, intelligence apparatuses, and diplomatic leverage. And when provoked, it does not fight with tabloid leaks. It fights with the crushing, silent weight of the law. She was checkmated. She could not go to her husband. She could not bring her children to their grandfather. She was, for all intents and purposes, exiled from the country her husband called home. And she could not fight it without destroying the very empire she had built to escape the royals. The public rollout of the decree was managed with Catherine's signature strategic brilliance. There was no sensational press release. There was no palace briefing. Instead, the Home Office quietly updated its guidance on diplomatic and commercial exclusions on a government website, buried in a Tuesday afternoon PDF update. A sharp-eyed legal journalist at the Times noticed the new Tier 2 classification, cross-referenced it with the corporate registry of Archewell, and broke the story at 8 p.m. The headline was clinical. Home Office enacts emergency security decree, effectively barring Duchess of Sussex from UK soil. The media explosion was instantaneous. The tabloids screamed about a royal civil war. The broadsheets ran frantic legal analyses of the royal prerogative. American cable news ran panels debating whether the British government had violated Meghan's human rights. But inside the palace, the reaction was a profound collective exhalation. The firewall was complete. The commercial contagion had been quarantined. The bloodline was protected. King Charles was informed of the decree by William on the morning of Harry's arrival. Charles was in his study at Highgrove, tending to his correspondence, when William walked in and placed the executed order on the desk. Charles read it. He read the classification. He read the suspension of entry. He looked up at his eldest son. Charles is a man who has spent his life avoiding confrontation, a man who prefers harmony, who prefers to let things fade rather than force a break. But as he read the decree, he did not express anger. He did not reprimand William for overstepping. He simply took off his reading glasses, folded them, and said, "You have done what I did not have the courage to do. I allowed my brother to be exiled by the press. I allowed my first wife to be destroyed by the institution. I allowed my second wife to be battered by the public. I have always let the current carry us. You have built..." It is brutal, William. It is cold, but it is necessary. The crown cannot survive if it is franchised. Charles signed his initials at the bottom of the document, adding the sovereign's quiet assent to his son's ruthless manoeuvre. The father had endorsed the amputation. The immediate logistical reality of the decree created a devastating geographical fracture for the Sussex family. Harry was in the UK. Meghan was in the US. But what of the children? Archie and Lilibet were in Montecito with their mother. Under the terms of the decree, Meghan cannot bring them to the UK because her entry is barred, and as their primary custodial parent and the principal of the flagged commercial entity, her travel with the children would be flagged as a commercial exploitation of sovereign adjacency. If she puts them on a plane to London, the border force will detain her, and the children will be caught in a diplomatic incident. Harry, therefore, is faced with an impossible choice. He can stay in the UK, separated from his children, or he can return to California, back into the commercial machine he fled, knowing that his wife can never set foot in his homeland again. Harry's decision, in the weeks following the decree, was to initiate a complex, quiet renegotiation of his life. He did not file for divorce. The legal and financial entanglements of Archewell are too vast, and the public spectacle of a royal divorce would be exactly the kind of chaos William's decree was designed to prevent. Instead, Harry established a separate residence in the UK, a leased property in the Cotswolds, far from London, far from the palace, but on British soil. He began the process of untangling his personal finances from the Archewell Holding Company. He resigned from the board. He surrendered his executive title. He effectively stripped himself of his commercial identity to cleanse himself of the Tier 2 risk. He told his lawyers, "I am no longer a brand. I am a private citizen. I am a father. I am a son. Strip the company off my name." This legal separation allowed Harry to petition the Home Office for a specific, highly restricted exemption for his children. Because Harry was no longer affiliated with the flagged entity, and because the children are direct descendants of the sovereign, the Home Office granted Archie and Lilibet unrestricted right of abode in the UK. But the exemption came with a brutal caveat. The children could enter the UK, but only if accompanied by their father or by a court-appointed guardian. They could not travel with their mother. The geography of the family was now legally codified. If the children are in California, they are with Meghan. If they are in the UK, they are with Harry. Meghan cannot cross the border to see them in London. Harry cannot force her to let them go. The family is now governed not by mutual agreement, but by an international custody arrangement dictated by a national security decree. The marriage is not legally over, but it is geographically and institutionally shattered. Meghan's public response to this new reality has been a masterclass in strategic pivoting. She did not give a tearful interview. She did not launch a legal war against the British government, knowing it would expose her corporate structures. Instead, she leaned entirely into her American identity. She launched a new initiative focused on US domestic policy, deliberately distancing the Archewell brand from anything resembling British royalty. She stopped using the
Duchess title in her commercial ventures, rebranding solely as Meghan Markle, CEO.
She's attempting to survive the exile by pretending the exiled territory never mattered. But those close to her report a profound, quiet fury. She is a woman who spent a decade fighting to be accepted by the institution, who fought to secure her place, who fought to ensure her children had their royal status. And now, the institution has not just rejected her, it has legally erased her from its physical space. She is the Duchess of Sussex, but she is banned from Sussex. The irony is a bitter daily pill she is forced to swallow. The historical parallels of this moment are impossible to ignore, and they haunt the corridors of the palace. The last time the British state moved to permanently exclude an American woman from the life of a senior royal was in 1936 with Wallis Simpson. But the dynamics are entirely inverted. In 1936, the institution feared Wallis because she held power over the king. They exiled her to save the crown from a compromised sovereign. Today, William did not ban Meghan because she holds power over Harry. He banned her because her commercial enterprise threatened to commodify the crown itself. In 1936, the exile was a romantic tragedy, a king giving up his throne for love. In 2024, the exile is a corporate restructuring, a prince giving up his marriage to protect the intellectual property of the state. The monarchy has evolved. It no longer fears scandal. It fears dilution. It fears the loss of control over its own narrative. And William's decree is the ultimate expression of that modern fear. He has proven that the crown will no longer be held hostage by the personal choices of its minor royals. If a minor royal builds a machine that threatens the core will dismantle the machine, even if it means breaking the royal in the process. What does this mean for Harry's psychological state? For 40 years, Harry's identity was defined by his relationship to the institution. He was the spare, the rebel, the victim, the exile. When he left to California, he believed he was building a new identity based on autonomy and commercial success. But the decree stripped that away. It forced him to realize that his commercial success was entirely dependent on the very royal bloodline he was trying to escape. Without the crown, Arcueil is just another production company. Without the drama, the investors lose interest. William's decree forced Harry to look in the mirror and see the truth. He cannot be both a royal and a commercial brand. He must choose. And by staying in the UK, by leasing the cottage in the Cotswolds, by resigning from the board, Harry has made his choice. He has chosen the soil of his birth over the empire of his marriage. He has chosen the quiet, painful reality of his heritage over the loud, lucrative illusion of his brand. It is a choice that has left him isolated, grieving, and profoundly lonely. But it is a choice that has, for the first time in his life, made him entirely his own man. William's perspective on the decree is one of cold, institutional satisfaction, tempered by deep, personal sorrow. He does not celebrate his brother's fractured marriage. He takes no joy in the geographical separation of his nephews and niece. But he views the decree as a necessary surgical intervention. He has spoken privately with Catherine about the burden of the decision, acknowledging that he has effectively ended his brother's marriage to save his brother's soul and to protect the future of the monarchy. Catherine, as always, provides the emotional ballast. She has initiated a quiet, back-channel correspondence with Meghan, not to negotiate the decree, which is immovable, but to establish a framework for the children's welfare. Catherine understands that while the state can ban a duchess, a family must still find a way to function across the divide. She's building the human bridge over the legal chasm William created.
It is the duality of their leadership. William wields the sword of the state, while Catherine tends to the wounds it leaves behind.
The legal permanence of the emergency decree is absolute. It is not a temporary injunction. It is a permanent classification under the National Security and Investment Act. It will remain in force as long as Archewell operates under its current foreign-funded structure. The only way Meghan can lift the ban is to dissolve the company or to buy out her foreign investors using personal funds, thereby removing the Tier 2 diplomatic risk classification. Given the scale of the investment, this is financially impossible without triggering a bankruptcy. Therefore, the ban is, in all practical terms, forever. She will not attend the coronation of King William. She will not stand on the balcony of Buckingham Palace. She will not walk through the grounds of Windsor. She will not visit the grave of her mother-in-law. The geography of the British monarchy is permanently closed to her. The gates are locked, the walls are high, and the law is absolute. What do you think? Was Prince William justified in using national security protocols to ban Meghan from the UK, or did he overstep the bounds of royal authority to settle a personal and commercial dispute? Does the emergency decree protect the monarchy from commercial exploitation, or does it set a dangerous precedent of weaponizing the state against family members? Is Harry's decision to remain in the UK and separate from his wife's business a sign of maturity, or a tragic surrender to the institution he once fought so hard to escape? And how will Archie and Lilibet navigate a childhood divided by an ocean and a national security decree? Tell us in the comments below. We read every single one, and this story, more than any we have covered, demands the community's judgment. If you want to stay ahead of the royal stories the mainstream media will not touch, make sure you are subscribed, turn on the notification bell. Share this with someone who understands that the most devastating exiles are not enforced by armies or walls, but by fountain pens, corporate classifications, and the quiet, bureaucratic machinery of the state. Because in the House of Windsor, the blood is the history, but the law is the border. And when the blood and the commerce conflict, the law always wins. Let us look deeper into the mechanics of the Tier 2 diplomatic risk classification, because it is a masterpiece of modern legal drafting. Standard visa denials require the Home Office to prove that an individual poses a direct threat to public safety or has committed a crime. But the royal prerogative, when intersected with the National Security Act, allows the government to deny entry to individuals whose presence could reasonably be construed as detrimental to the diplomatic or commercial integrity of the sovereign. By defining Archewell's monetization of the royal children as a commercial subversion of sovereign dignity, William's lawyers created a legal category that had never been used before. They effectively ruled that the British royal family is not just a family, it is a state asset, and any unauthorized commercial exploitation of that asset by a foreign entity is a threat to the state. It is a brilliant, terrifying expansion of institutional power. It means that no one, not even a duchess, can profit from the crown without the crown's explicit, documented consent. Meghan attempted to build an empire on the crown's adjacency without paying the crown's toll. The decree is the toll collector, and the toll is her physical presence in the country. The impact on the broader royal adjacent industry has been seismic. Following the enactment of the decree, several other minor royals and extended family members who had been quietly leveraging their titles for commercial endorsements, podcast deals, and brand ambassadorships suddenly found their contracts under review. The legal precedent set by the Sussex decree sent a shockwave through the PR and legal firms of London. If the Prince of Wales was willing to banish his own sister-in-law to protect the brand, he would certainly not hesitate to strip titles, revoke patronages, or initiate legal action against cousins and nephews who stepped out of line. The slimmed-down monarchy is no longer just a PR strategy. It is a legally enforced corporate structure. The perimeter has been secured. The freeloaders have been warned. The core is impenetrable. William has achieved in one legal strike what Queen Elizabeth spent decades trying to manage through quiet pressure and polite disappointment. He has made the rules explicit, and he has proven he will enforce them with extreme prejudice. For King Charles, the decree brings a complex, bittersweet peace. He has his younger son back on British soil. Harry is nearby. They can walk the grounds of Highgrove. They can talk about the gardens, about the soil, about the quiet things that do not involve cameras or contracts. But Charles also knows that the son who returned is not the son who left. The Harry who sits across from him at dinner is quieter, more guarded, carrying the heavy, invisible grief of a fractured marriage and a severed life in California. Charles tries to fill the silences. He talks about his environmental initiatives. He talks about the weather. But both men know that the silence is filled with the ghost of the life Harry left behind. Charles has his son back, but he knows he is holding a man who is still mourning the life he thought he was going to build. The crown demands sacrifices. And Charles knows, better than anyone, that the sacrifices never truly stop hurting. As we look to the future, the geographical fracture of the Sussex family will become the new normal. Archie and Lilibet will grow up as transatlantic children, spending their summers in the Cotswolds with their father, learning about the history of the island, walking the estates, meeting their grandfather. And they will spend their school years in California with their mother, immersed in the culture of American commerce, media, and progressive activism. They will be children of two entirely different worlds, separated by an ocean and a legal decree. They will not understand the complexities of the Tier 2 classification. They will only know that Mummy cannot come to the big castle in London and that Daddy cannot live in the big house by the ocean. The tragedy of the decree is not just what it does to the adults. It is the geography it imposes on the children. They are the innocent inheritors of a war between the crown and the market, and they will spend their lives navigating the border that was drawn to protect them. The media narrative will eventually move on. The tabloids will find new scandals. The broadsheets will focus on the transition to King William. The emergency decree will fade from the public consciousness, buried in the dense, unreadable archives of the Home Office, but its effects will ripple through the institution for generations. It will be studied by constitutional lawyers. It will be whispered about by future courtiers. It will be the ultimate cautionary tale told to any royal who thinks they can outsmart the firm. The decree is the line in the sand. It is the physical manifestation of the monarchy's immune system, identifying a commercial virus and ruthlessly excising it from the body. Meghan is the virus that was excised. Harry is the tissue that was saved, scarred but surviving. And William is the surgeon who held the scalpel, knowing that the cut would bleed, but knowing the patient would die without it. What does this story tell us about the monarchy? It tells us that the institution is not a family, it is a sovereign entity. It operates on the logic of survival, not the logic of love. When love and survival conflict, survival always wins. William loves his brother, but he loves the crown more. And when the crown was threatened, he acted with the cold, unfeeling precision of the state. It tells us that the era of the rebel royal is over. You can no longer leave the institution, use its imagery to build a personal fortune, and expect to retain the privileges of the bloodline. The institution has learned how to fight back. It has learned how to use the law, the borders, and the intelligence services to protect its monopoly on royal dignity. The crown is no longer a passive victim of modern media. It is an active, aggressive defender of its own sovereignty. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.